So please, Jakub, we are very happy that you are with us here, and the stage is yours. Thanks very much for coming.
So thank you, Davor, for the invitation and for the possibility for the opportunity to talk here. Today's subject will be a contemporary topic or contemporary or very fashionable topic in the contemporary philosophical debates, maybe too fashionable. So I'm very looking forward to a discussion after the talk. This is the overview of my talk. I will be giving the background idea. That means that we have in fact today two concepts of ontology or of ontologies. The traditional concept which goes back to Aristotle, or maybe even earlier, and which was subject to metaphysics and to the whole history of philosophy. Since 1970s, there is another concept of ontology originating in artificial intelligence or in computer science or in say accounting for knowledge in databases, which is somehow different, or which has been considered to be different, but there is a substantial overlap between these two, or in these two concepts, and the topic of my talk is how computer science method can be utilized in philosophical debates, or more general in philosophical thinking. I will first present what is the idea of a backbone ontology, which allows us to capture ontological commitments of a philosophical text. Then I will proceed to a subject which is really this contemporary thing, and these are verbal disputes. Verbal disputes are, let's say, reflection on or meta level of philosophical texts originated in contemporary metaphysics, and the concept is now utilized by David Chalmers, which is a philosophical star today, maybe and finally, if time permits, I will give an example of the framework I will be presenting and show how a philosophical or dispute can be resolved or cannot be resolved on an example of a dispute about some interpretation of Ludwig Wittgenstein's Tractatus. But we don't need to go to the last part of my talk. I would prefer to have a longer discussion. So, the expression ontology has been used in a philosophical sense for a study of nature of being, existence, and reality. I will take it primarily in its Aristotelian sense as a study of categories of being. Ontology, however, in a different sense, has been used in computer science and information technology for representing knowledge of a source domain and making easily retrievable, accessible, combinable, and especially susceptible for automatic processing. So, and the main assumption of the paper is that there is an overlap, or these two concepts are compatible with each other. So, first, then, this Aristotelian account of ontology has been contested by recent philosophers of the analytic tradition, most notably by Carnap and Quine. Carnap argued that so-called external question concerning the nature of existence or the nature of being are not questions about reality, but rather a practical question whether we should adopt this or that conceptual framework, or these or that categories. Once accepted, once is a conceptual framework accepted, sentences or questions within this framework are easy to resolve. These are so-called analytic questions. Questions outside the framework are, so Carnap argued, nonsensical, because they go over our language, over our agreed, over the framework we have previously agreed on. So they are meaningless. Quine, by his argument against the distinction between analytic and synthetic sentences, undermined in fact the distinction between a framework and a content of this framework. So this strategy issues into a ontological relativity. That means thesis that the ontology is relative to language. So what ontology we do have is relative to, or is depends on what language we use. It was in outline the philosophical notion or the philosophical concept of ontology. Second, the notion of ontology was introduced into information science by researchers in the field of artificial intelligence. These researchers have been interested in the nature of human reasoning, more in the nature of human reasoning than in the nature of reality. So the meaning of information ontology shifted in the early 1990s towards a more content-based models. Ontology in information science aims to represent a knowledge of a source domain. There has been a certain efforts to bring these two notions closer to each other. Hirsch introduced the notion of soft ontology, which has been later used in information science. Another line of thinking is focused on the notion of naive ontology or naive physics. It means that we have in our grasping of reality, we have a naive, some naive notion of physics, and that means then a naive notion of what happens with things around us. So, and I would in my presentation, in my talk, propose a rather deflationary account of this distinction between philosophical and information science notion of ontology. So, this is the basic idea. I want to restrict myself only to the source domain, the source domain to texts, or more closely to a philosophical text, especially. So, now ontology in a computer science sense aims to represent knowledge of a text in a possibly surveyable form. Such an ontology itself is, however, represented by another ontology language. And we have now many formal ontology languages now, like web ontology language or a resource description framework, and there are more and more. So, in particular, an ontology is represented by a text, and we might ask how the ontology of this text is, what is the ontology of this text. So, let's say look at this hierarchy. we have some reality or some source domain we would like to describe or to. Then we have an ontological text about this reality. Let's say Aristotle's Metaphysics is an ontological text which aims to describe the reality, or some, let's say, some basics text or text of physics, some, let's say, corpus of Newton text or whatever. We can then now represent in a surveyable form these texts in some formal language. We can describe the ontology of these texts. What is the ontology in this level of Aristotle's books on metaphysics? Now we can reiterate this this idea and try to build an ontology of this formal language, of the formal language which we use to describe philosophical accounts or philosophical text, philosophical text on ontologies. So, and we can go further and further. We can try to describe on a meta level what is here going on, what we are describing. So now the question is how these ontologies are related to each other. A natural requirement would be that for any construction of a text ontology, the object ontology must be preserved in the text. We cannot lose anything if we aim to describe a reality on an ontological text. So the ontology of the lower level must be included in the ontology of the upper level. Now it's vice versa. Now, in order to stop this potentially infinite hierarchy of ontologies, we must build such a formal language, such an ontological language, which would use only the framework of the source domain, which is the ontology describing. So, at some point, the new level will not add anything new to the previous to the lower level, to the object level. So it might happen on the first, even on the second or third level, whatever. So so this is a natural requirement that a text ontology make the source domain surveyable without modifying it, without adding anything beyond it. So we can now see that the hierarchy collapses into ideally in only three levels. There is a reality, there is a text in a natural languages, in a natural language about reality, and there is a formal account of this text. This hierarchy would collapse only if the ontological commitment of this formal language would be the same that the ontological commitment of this textual ontology, and in order to give a true account of reality, they must have the same ontological. It must be the same ontology as the real ontology around us. So. Now the collapse of this hierarchy happens regardless regardless of adopting of the Carnapian or the Quinian conception of language and ontology described above. So, moreover, we can omit the intermediate level, the textual ontology, and speak only about a formal ontology of which applies, or which can be applied directly to reality. So we can stop thinking in textual ontologies, but use only formal ontologies. So, in other words, there is no ontological difference between a textual ontology and a formal ontology. That is the basic idea that brings these two concepts of ontology, ontology in a philosophical sense and ontology in an information or computer science sense, together. And needless to say, it's an ideal. We still don't have such a rich formal language which would have the same ontological commitment as our natural languages. So, the question is, or the problem is now, which formal language we adopt. And the question is a practical one. We should adopt, or we should take, or we should build a formal language which allows us the most surveyable knowledge of the source domain, which is everything around us, which is the reality. So, now how this can be done? So far, I have been indifferent to the question whether we adopt the Carnapian or the Quinian conception of language. The hierarchy collapses in both cases, but the resulting ontology will be different regard to these two conceptions of language. If we accepted the distinction between linguistic framework and its content, the resulting ontology would involve a backbone ontology, so-called backbone ontology, and its content. The notion of a backbone ontology is crucial here. Backbone ontology aims to capture everything which belongs which belongs to the representational framework. A backbone ontology consists of so-called bedrock concepts, their relations, truths, some basic truths involving these concepts, so-called axioms, and perhaps other classes. I will come to this later. So, in the Carnapian setting, the formal ontology, the formal ontology number 3 consists of the ontology of the second level plus the backbone ontologies plus their conceptual framework. Now, we can, at this level or at this point, ask several, let's say, questions which has been considered as a philosophical question, but this question can be now resolved or applied in this framework. So, we can ask a simple question: should this or that entity be a part of a backbone ontology? So, let's say we can ask whether intentional relations or intentional concepts are part of the backbone ontology. That means should the backbone ontology contain only property relation and properties between things, or should it contain also second order properties and second order relations between concepts? This is unresolved issue. Which kind of logic we should adopt? Quine argued that we don't need a second order logic. Other philosophers like I don't know, like Hintika argued that we need a logic of higher logic, or some logic of higher orders. Now this is the question, only practical question: which backbone ontology we adopt? Another question: can a backbone ontology become a subject of a philosophical debate? So, can we? Is it a philosophical question what is the shape of the backbone ontology? Which backbone ontology we adopt? That's very problematic, because in the Carnapian setting, this should not be a philosophical question. It should not be a practical question. Which, let's say, which language is the most convenient language in order to describe a source domain, which is the reality? If backbone ontology becomes a subject of a philosophical debate, so it must involve some meta language which goes beyond the backbone ontology, which would only show that the ontology which we considered, or which we have considered as a backbone ontology, is in fact an ontology describing something substantial. So it would show us that we should adopt more general language which allows you to resolve this or that philosophical issue. Next question: are all ontologies of the same value, or that means is a conceptual relativism true? All these questions are now issuing into the following one: what criteria could help us to prefer one ontology over another one? Ontologies in computer science were designed for heuristic purposes. So maybe the heuristic criteria could be helpful here in this framework too. And the aim of this talk, or my idea, is that exactly heuristic criteria which are open for automatic or semi-automatic processing can be helpful in resolving ontological debates. Last question I will let's say ask here, or the last problem I will before going to the to the problem of defining verbal disputes, is what sorts of truths, what sorts of axioms can a backbone ontology comprise? This is also very different, or we can find many accounts of these basic truths. Traditionally, it has been logical axioms. What is the basic truth? Or Descartes' cogito is another option. What to adopt as the basic truth? Or let's say in Carnapian settings, it's our observational truths. So what is observational sentences are the only sentences which are true without any or the most certain truths. Or we can use take as the basic truths some general facts of nature, some basic laws, or something like this. So now adopting Quinian holistic picture of language, no such thing like a backbone ontology would be possible. Let's say at least no single backbone ontology would be possible in a Quinian setting. So a Quinian ontology would be a linked web of concepts and relations, but there is no distinction what is the framework and what would be the content which is the ontology aims to describe. But there still we can make a sense of some bedrock concepts which are the concepts which are the most important for us. Again, in some practical perspective, in some heuristic, and treat this concept as something which resembles the backbone ontology. This would be always relative to some perspective. So, also in the Quinian setting, we can distinguish between backbone concepts and, or let's say, bedrock concepts and something which belongs to the source domain without any absolutization of it. Or we can take Wittgenstein's conception of language and with its language games, which can see as a local ontologies. A language game is local builds up a local ontology within a let's say holistic, overall holistic picture of language. Now, in the second part of my talk, I would like to apply this framework to the contemporary problem of verbal disputes. The idea is that some philosophical disputes, some philosophical exchange between real people, between us, seems at first glance or prima facie substantive. It seems to be a dispute about a real problem, but it may happen that at some level we disagree only because of adopting different languages, or we disagree only on the meaning of certain philosophical concepts. The most frappant example, which has been widely discussed in this respect, is the debate on free will. Some philosopher wanted to show that this is not a real debate, but only a debate on some meaning of some basic terms. What is a free? What is a will? What is a causality, and so on. But I want, in this I would like to present another, so apply this framework to another discussion. This is a seminal definition of a verbal dispute by David Chalmers from 2005-6. A dispute over a sentence is broadly verbal when, for some expression T in S, the parties disagree about the meaning of T, and the dispute over S arises wholly in virtue of this disagreement regarding T. It means a dispute is resolved if it's identified as a verbal dispute. But the problem is, now it's easy to say that someone or two parties disagree only, or two or more parties disagree only about the meaning of some expression. The real problem is how to find it, and what is this? What is the expression? And to show that if we change the meaning of this expression, then the dispute will be resolved. Or that nothing happens if we just adopt another meaning, if we just take the expression T in another meaning. So, how to find out? Chalmers provides what he calls the method of elimination. The method proceeds as follows. In order to find out whether a dispute over a sentence S is verbal with respect to some expression T, which is used in this sentence, one eliminates T from the vocabulary and use just the definition of T, which is not recursive, which does not involve T within this definition, and tries to restate or reformulate the sentence S without T. If there is still a disagreement over S, over the new sentence S, then we need to reiterate this procedure. We need to try find another expression and try to again eliminate it from our vocabulary and again make the test anew and find out whether this dispute is verbal or whether we still are disagreeing or not. In the view of language derived from Carnap, the method will sooner or later reach the backbone ontology. And Chalmers, when proposing this definition, was adopting a Carnapian conception of language. So, if we reach by eliminating this and this concept, the backbone ontology, then we can see that the dispute is backbone ontology means that or reaching a backbone ontology means that the concept cannot be further eliminated because it's something which belongs to the framework. Then the dispute is clearly not a verbal one. In a Quinean setting, there is no privileged backbone ontology, and this method of elimination can be reiterated endlessly. Of course, if there are some concepts left, so we cannot eliminate all the whole language. Chalmers' definition Chalmers' definition of a verbal dispute is restricted to one sentence only, and it's parameterized by a certain expression. So it's a definition of a verbal dispute for one sentence and for one expression. In my method, now I would like to propose a generalized account of verbal disputes, which utilizes the notion of ontology, which I defined earlier. A dispute over two texts or two sets of sentences is P and is verbal if and only if both sentences can be mapped into the same ontology. So the idea behind is that text or sentences which can be represented by formal ontologies or can be mapped into formal ontologies, and these ontologies, these formal ontologies, are subsequently compared. If there is any disagreement between these texts or in this text, it should be rendered as a disagreement between ontologies representing this text. That's the main idea. So now, that is also easy to say. We have to clarify two main concepts involved in this definition. First, how can a text be mapped into an ontology? And second, how do we compare two ontologies in order to find out whether they are same or whether they actually disagree? So, to the first point, building a textual ontology is a creative process that involves an interpretation and involves interpreting the text in question, as opposed to engineering a backbone ontology, which is, let's say, which should be open for any interpretation. So, to represent the text in a formal language means or subsumes interpreting the text. We cannot represent the text which we don't understand. So, ontologies that represent a text together with its particular interpretation. So, therefore, an agreement or disagreement over ontologies involves agreement or disagreement over different interpretations of the very same text. It seems that Chalmers' definition does not involve such a mapping from a text to interpretation and then to an ontology. But this is not so. The parties may disagree about the meaning about the sentence S in a Chalmers setting as a result of their different interpretation of a sentence S. So roughly speaking, an interpretation of a text is assignment of meanings to parts of this text, to sentences or to, let's say, or smaller units. So, if the disagreement comes about only in virtue of the disagreement of interpretations, the dispute is then verbal. We just interpret differently the same sentence. So, hence a verbal, or to say it other way around, verbal disputes are always disputes about interpretations of the same text or the same sentence or longer text. So, Chalmers' definition reduces differences in interpretation to agreement or disagreement over the meaning of a single expression. The aim of my definition is to allow more complex patterns of disagreement. Furthermore, there is the underlying backbone ontology may not be rich enough in order to capture all substantial differences between these two texts. It's a formal language which is too simple, which is the case of the most of the contemporary formal languages. So, on the other hand, these ontologies may be too complex So there would be no advantage in translating or the mapping the source domain, the text into an ontology and comparing comparing these ontologies. It would be easier to just compare these two texts itself or themselves. So there is a kind of trade-off. Let's say we should not, the backbone ontology should not be too simple in order to capture all substantial differences, but it should not be too complex in order to be open for heuristic methods and for methods of automatic processing. To the second point, now we have a mapping into we resolve all these problems with mapping the text into an ontology. Then how to find out the disagreement, or what is, as a matter of fact, a disagreement of in or between two ontologies. Disagreement doesn't mean, or agreement in ontologies doesn't mean that the two ontologies are the same. So two ontologies can agree without being exactly the same. Then it would be trivial. The presence of a, let's say, logical contradiction between two ontologies is not the only type of disagreement in ontologies. It would be also too trivial. Disagreement, in fact, arises on two levels. They might be disagreement in entities and disagreement in statements. Two ontologies may disagree in entities. That means they are their source domains are different. They may be overlapping, or there may be a difference. So the source domains are not the. So these ontologies are about something else. One ontology is about one domain, and another ontology is about another domain. Then there is no sense in claiming that they disagree in some claims. If two ontologies are about different source domains, there cannot disagree. Let's say we have one ontology on about in biology and another ontology in social sciences. Where is a disagreement? Because they capture totally different domains. But this is also a trivial case. Usually two ontologies partly overlap in entities and partly are different. So the question comes up to the following: what are the ontological commitments of two ontologies? Before we can find out whether there is some disagreement in what they are claiming, we have to, let's say, map their entities, or entities which we are commit to one to another, or there must be some isomorphism between these entities, and then we can after that we can start to find out whether there is some real disagreement. So disagreement in statements, and agreement or disagreement in statements in what is claimed by these ontologies presupposes at least partial agreement in entities. So at least a partial agreement in what these are ontologies about. Copying okay, so based on this consideration, we can now make our definition more precise. A dispute over two sets of sentences S and P, or two texts S and P, is verbal if and only if, given their mapping into ontologies, both sets have the same ontological commitment, so there is an agreement in entities, and every statement from P follows from S, and every statement from S follows from P. So there is an agreement in statements. So there are two conditions on what is to be a verbal disputes. There must be agreement on entities, and statements about these entities must be translatable from each from another. Okay. What are the advantages of my account? The sets S and P may differ only in one sentence. If the set P or set P contain only one sentence and set S only its negation, then we would have arrived at Chalmers' scenario. So my definition is clearly a generalized account of Chalmers' definition. But there are some disputes which are according to according to Carnap definition verbal, but they are intuitively or which are in Carnap Chalmers settings substantial, but they are intuitively verbal. This is the example. Consider two terms, T1 and T2, from the sets S and P, but their meaning is swapped. So T1 means the same what T1 in the one theory or one set means the same as T2 in the other set, and vice versa. So example, what we call table in one theory or one theory is chair, means chair in another theory, and what is chair in one theory means table in another theory. Let's say that's trivial. So this simple, let's say, conceptual difference is not accountable in Chalmers settings, in Chalmers definition. But if we use a method of methods of ontology matching, so if we just map the entities from one to another ontology, it's easy to find out that these two meanings or these two entities are the same, or their meaning are just swapped, and the disagreement is only a verbal one. Second, next, my definition is able to handle the Carnapian as well the Quinean conception of language and ontology. Chalmers' definition was meant only for a Carnapian account of language, and it is highly problematic in a Quinean holistic conception of language. My definition is can be applied also to a Quinean conception of language. Second, and what's the main goal of this paper, or of this idea is, if we map a text into a formal ontology, we can use automatic or semi-automatic methods of processing in order to find out whether there is a agreement or disagreement. I think there will never be a fully automatic procedure or fully automatic method how to find out whether two philosophical texts are in disagreement or not. We cannot just put Aristotle's metaphysic and let's say Descartes' meditations into a machine and then just find out whether there is an agreement or disagreement. The reason will be, as I said, just the mapping from a text into an ontology is a creative process. It could not be made automatic. But there are some attempts, let's say semi-automatic attempts, how to build an ontology from a text. Today we possess algorithms how to make an automatic index from a text. So we can put a text, let's say our paper or our book into an algorithm, and there will be automatically generated index, also a multi-level index. These index are not, let's say, not so useful today, but as a starting point, let's say, we can have a look what is in the text going on, and then try to find, let's say, maybe there is some agreement in entities, and we can try out in reading the text and interpreting the text, find out whether there is a real disagreement and where the disagreement is located. So that is that is the main idea I wanted to present today. In the last part, if there is a time, or if you like, there is one application. It's a disagreement in interpretation over Wittgenstein Tractate. So should I present this this example, or can you like?
If it is not too long, we will pay.
No.
So please.
Okay. So I try to. There are not many ontologies of a philosophical text nowadays, but there are some. One of them is a so-called Wittgenstein ontology, which is an ontology built upon the corpus of Ludwig Wittgenstein's work, his published paper, or his manuscript, which has been digitalized and recognized as a text. So we possess in a digitalized form everything what was written by Ludwig Wittgenstein, and there is some tagging of this text. So we can recognize sentences, single concepts, and so on. Moreover, we can add to this textual corpus also secondary literature, which is much more bigger than actual Wittgenstein text. So there are so many much more text on Wittgenstein than Wittgenstein actual text. We can now use this textual corpus and try to find out whether some disputes in or over interpreting of some Wittgenstein key texts are verbal or not. So in this example, I try to focus only on Wittgenstein Tractatus, which is a text which is relatively short, 50 pages, but extremely complex, and they are, as a matter of fact, there is much disagreement in a contemporary debate. What was the aim of the Tractatus, and how to interpret what is the text actually about? In order to do so, I try to so I would like to focus only on one particular question in interpreting the Tractatus. And the dispute is over the so-called traditional or the resolute reading of the Tractatus. A reading or interpretation of the Tractatus is called resolute if it takes all the propositions of the Tractatus to be nonsensical and which we must recognize as not capable of carrying or of conveying any insights. So the goal of the book is to recognize that the book is itself nonsensical. We start reading the book, and if we understand it, and in the course of interpreting of the book, of the text, we, according to this interpretation, we should recognize that the book itself is nonsensical. The traditional interpretation would be in the course of the reading of the book, we should adopt our language so that it would not allow any nonsensical sentences, and nonsensical sentences are such that are not a stating of facts. So, according to the traditional interpretation, we should we should adjust our language so that it allows only to say what is the case, not anything beyond it. So, this is a dispute. There are many people that are claiming that the resolute reading was the intended meaning by Wittgenstein, and there are many that claiming that the traditional reading makes more sense. In order to find out what is where the dispute can be located, I try to make a ontology or conceptual ontology of the text, which it is manually made. So I use some automatical some algorithm for automatical indexing, but then I have to just put it into the graphical ontology editor and just put all this relation there. And so that is the basic so-called ontology of the Tractatus, and it's for the most part is not controversial. Wittgenstein claimed that the state of affairs is made of individual objects, and there are complex facts which are made of states of affair. We have facts which are either states of affair or atomic facts or complex facts. Facts are part of the world, and the property of each fact its logical form. That's the level of ontology, and that's the level of language. We have atomic propositions which are made of individual names. We have complex propositions which are made of atomic propositions. Propositions are either complex or atomic. Our language is made of propositions. Our language consists of propositions. That is not problematic. This is not problematic. We can these relations. We can read it in the first sentences of the Tractatus. This is what is just written there. The problem is with the whole sense of the why we are doing this. At the end of the Tractatus, Wittgenstein says that all these sentences are in fact nonsensical, but they can elucidate us in our view of language. So he says that all propositions or actual propositions of the Tractatus are elucidations. Use this word, elucidation, and that's our propositions. But according to the definition of a proposition, what is a proposition in a Tractatus? Proposition is only such a sentence which states what is the fact. But many of the sentences of the Tractatus are not of this form. It is not, they are not in the form this or that is the case. So, according to the criterion of sense of the Tractatus, these sentences are, the sentences of the Tractatus itself are nonsensical. So, what would be the point to write a nonsensical book? The question boils down to this. What is an elucidation? If we manage to say that an elucidation is something which is a sentence which is not a statement of a fact of what is the case, but is something like laws of logic, which shows, laws of logic show some logical properties of our of the world, of the reality, some scaffolding of the world. So, if the, and that is the, these two relations or these two lines are problematic in this whole setting. If we manage to argue that elucidations, or the way how the propositions of the Tractatus work, is like logical laws which show the logical structure or logical form of the world, then we could accept the classical interpretation, or if there is a real difference between elucidations and propositions. So, if elucidations are not a subclass of propositions, then the resolute interpretation of the Tractatus is the right one. So, if so, then the dispute would be substantial. But if elucidation is only another, means the same as a proposition, elucidations are a kind of propositions, then the dispute would be verbal, because the parties would only disagree about the meaning of elucidation. So it seems now that the whole problem is now with this schema, with this ontology resolved, but it's not so easy, because it's a problematic question. If we can say, is elucidation a part of, is an elucidation, are elucidations part, a kind of proposition? It's not the easy question, but this whole ontology approach can help us to locate the problem, to show where the problem exactly lies and where we have to focus on. We are far from make this. There is no automatical procedure in this example. We are really at the very beginning of this approach. My aim was only to show how this may be used in future. So that's all I wanted to present. Thank you very much.